Yeah. It's not that hard to mess up. Sure, absolutely. So I am the Chief Information and Digital Transformation Officer at Christ Hospital Health Network. I've been here for a little over a year now. We are located in Cincinnati, and many people may not know this, but our organization was actually founded in 1888 by James Gamble of Procter and Gamble and a deaconess called Isabella Thornton, just wanting to help kind of with the health and just with the city of Cincinnati, trying to, allow it to grow and the economy and so forth. So really got a long history and legacy in the city. We pride ourselves on great quality. So I think we just were recently ranked 11th in the region in Cincinnati and by US News and World Report. I think 4 times Magnet accredited, very well known for our cardiovascular and oncology and musculoskeletal service lines. So, kind of, I like to think of it as like a smaller health system that really tries to provide exceptional care, for our patients and our community. So it's been really fun and it's been a good journey. Yeah. Sure, sure. I mean, I don't think you would be surprised to hear about AI because, no one's ever talking about it, right? But the way I see it, it's like for the past year or two, everybody's kind of been dipping their toes in, right? And now people are like, "Oh, this water is nice," and everybody now wants to jump in and start swimming, but we're not always prepared, right? And you don't know what's in the water necessarily. So, in the same way, even in the past year at Christ, I think we've put in a few key AI initiatives, seen success, and now it's kind of like opened the floodgates. So I think going forward, it's really more about now kind of stabilization and operationalizing not only the current AI we have, but also what is the process to bring in new AI? Because, as most health systems, we have limited budget, and that's, IT department is no exception, right? And so how do we put in the proper governance so that we can really decide what are going to be the, kind of the needle movers, right? Which are the projects that will align to our strategic goals, as well as like how are we going to manage the risk going forward? We do the assessments at the beginning, right, in terms of cybersecurity risk and potential for, say, hallucinations of AI, right, or divergence. But on an ongoing basis, how are you going to manage that, as well as the more and more reliance we have on third parties? There's increasing risk there. So I think it's kind of all of those things that we really want to put in place so we can mature as an organization and not just be kind of doing spot solutions, I guess, if you will. Yeah, sure. So for us, it's really about, first starting with the physician and the clinician, right? How do we reduce their administrative burden, especially around like the EHR? We're on Epic. How do we, the way I like to think of it is the technology should almost like disappear and they can just do their job and be there with the patient, right? So whether it's like they don't have to look at their tablet, right, when they're in the room because you have ambient listening, right? Or they don't have to go back and now start entering orders because, the system knows to do that next, right? And then there's automation. So really just have the technology kind of disappear. And then I think the second one area we're focusing on is, and this is my point about budget, is how do we make our team members more productive, right? So in the revenue cycle space, how can we put in automation, right? How can we put in coding for things that are more, repetitive, right? And kind of a little bit more formulaic because, our philosophy is if you have physicians that are productive and that are not burdened by the technology, if you have team members that are kind of working at their full potential, then excellent patient care will automatically follow, right? I think if you start with thinking about the patient, and I'll give you an example, the whole advent of patients being able to message their doctors, right? And it's great, right? You can now reach out to your doctor anytime, but you don't see the other side where you have a doctor who is receiving hundreds and hundreds of messages, some of them urgent, some of them not, right? And they have a personal obligation. I've heard this from doctors, myself, like they have a personal obligation to read through these and get back because they don't know, right? One might be a patient who's asking about a medicine, and if they don't get the answer, they might take something, wrong, right? Or they might, you know, need something that they need to provide. And so, you know, it was all in good intent to allow the patient to have free access to to their doctor, but we didn't think about the implication, right? So I think by kind of flipping it a little bit and thinking about how do we make sure that our doctors can provide the best care that they can, right? Because there's things that only they can do that a machine cannot do, right? And that, technology can't do, AI cannot do. Let them do what they do best, and then we'll support them. And I think kind of changing that. And so like even last year, two of the big projects we put in were one I already mentioned, that kind of ambient scribe. And another one that we started working on was addressing this problem of the messaging inbox, and how do we help kind of use AI? We're using AI to categorize the messages and then be able to route them. So maybe some don't even need to go to the doc. Some could go to the nurse, some to go to, more billing, as well as, can we use AI to flag certain messages and to say, this one's an urgent one, while this one is more of a appointment related issue versus, kind of an advice question. I've got pain in my knee versus, like I feel like my heart is exploding, right? And so, those are like some of the things that we're really trying to figure out and how we can keep on pushing forward. Yeah, so I actually have a pretty, I don't know, maybe unconventional background. I started wanting to go into healthcare because of the whole mission behind it. I even went as far as to, try to take some courses. And then I realized quickly that I didn't have the stomach for it. You know, I distinctly remember at one time in class, they're like, "Okay, next week we're gonna start like practicing pricking each other." And I was like, "Oh!" And then the next week after that, they're like, "We're gonna bring in the cadavers," and I was like, "I can't. I'm sorry, but I cannot do this." And so so I found myself going into consulting. I did consulting kind of a big three, big five for like 8 years. And then after that, I worked at a variety of industries. So I did gas and utilities. I worked for Domino's. But as kind of, I guess it was fortunate that I was reached out to by Beaumont Health in Michigan saying, "Hey, we've got a role, a leader in IT for you, are you interested?" And of course I was. And so that's kind of how I got in. And it was around 2020. So I was, yeah, exactly. I was trying to learn healthcare, as well as trying to navigate, help my new team now navigate through, a global pandemic to which we had never seen before, right? But it's interesting though, because I found that a lot of the background that I had gained from outside of healthcare actually helped. So for example, when you think about Domino's, a lot of times like the organization refers to itself as like a tech company that happens to sell pizza, right? And so there was just a lot of innovation going on there, probably before a lot of others around how do we give people mobile access, right? And how do we kind of meet the consumer where they are, right? It was all about the experience. And those are all things that now, especially when we got into the pandemic, we needed to figure out very quickly, right? How do we allow people now to do things, in a way using technology that they weren't, they didn't have to do before, right? The whole telehealth idea. So I think, kind of using some of the practices that I had learned, as well as, some of the strategies around kind of, especially around, kind of failing fast, working in more of an agile framework, I think those are the kind of things that actually helped, when we got into healthcare. And so, and really just been in healthcare since then and been loving it. Um, yeah, you know, during the pandemic, got into gardening, and being a glutton for punishment, I decided to go with like the most difficult plant there is. So I started growing roses. Um, yeah, exactly. And my husband thinks I'm crazy because, at one point I had like 40 rose bushes in the garden. But to me, that's, I like the challenge, right? I like being able to study, learn about it, and how, just like you nurture a team, right? Or you nurture, I'm a parent, right? Just how you nurture your kids, even with plants, you have to figure out, right? What do they need, right? What's ailing them? How do I make them thrive? Not all roses are the same. Like it's kind of the way I approach everything. And so it's like, I have to really take a step back and make sure I understand, and take a, really analytical approach. And so, that's just, one thing that I like to do in my free time. But, you know, I would say don't take life too seriously, probably. I think I could still tell myself that today, honestly, right? I think there's a lot of pressure, especially now, more so than ever, to make decisions, right? On like what sport do you want to be in? Back when we were younger, right? It's like you could just play any sport and have fun and you could try five different things in high school. But now it's like by the time you're six, you need to say, like, I want to be go into baseball, I want to go into soccer, I want to go into volleyball, right? Right. There is a lot of pressure. And a lot of it I think is self-inflicted. And so for me, I think as a, 18, 20, 22-year old, it's like, and maybe it's a little bit that Gen X thing, where we grew up kind of as known as a latchkey generation and very self-reliant. It's like, okay, I need to figure out what do I need to do? And I need to figure out what is that next career step, and, I think over time I realized that your career is not necessarily always going to just take a vertical path, right? And that's okay. Sometimes you're going to go diagonally, sometimes you're going to go sideways. And as long as you're growing and as long as and you know this, right? As long as you like what you do and you're working with good people, I think, that's more important than just really climbing the ladder. Um, yeah, right. Well, for you, did you know you always wanted to, do this that you're doing now? Was you predicted? Yeah, exactly. Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Hmm. Absolutely. Um, from a personal standpoint or from a professional standpoint? I think having kids, honestly, you just no manual, and you don't know, what are you going to get, and am I going to be a good parent, right? So it's a big responsibility. So I think that's a risk, and in terms of a professional career, I think anytime you step into a new role with a new organization, I think you're always taking some kind of risk because, you think about it in the interview process, you spend a couple of months getting to know each other and all they see of you is your best interview face, right? And also you see of them is kind of like, they say everything's great. We love our organization and, we have no issues. And then, you really don't know until you get there and you kind of look under the hood. And so, I think just going in kind of eyes wide open and, just trying to figure out, how do I make the best of any situation that I'm put into. But I think, that's when you think about risk from a personal and professional standpoint, it's, taking on a new role, especially say if you have to move, right, relocate your family. But thankfully, I've been lucky enough that, I think the path I've taken has worked out and, and I'm enjoying where I am today. And then, yeah, I would say for healthcare, you really have to have a passion for it because it's tough, right? Again, like there's, we don't print money. And so you're always going to be kind of dealing with these, challenges, say not enough budget, not enough resources. But if you like challenges and you like being creative, right, and you like finding solutions and you like feeling like you're doing something more than just kind of lining, a shareholder's pockets, like I think healthcare is great. And so I think but really understanding what the environment is really important. You're never, going to be paid like as much as maybe someone else who's in your same role who works, for a tech company, right, or a for profit. And I think yeah, absolutely, absolutely, it is, and it's so satisfying, especially nowadays, where it's like you can't do anything in healthcare without technology. So it's like I tell my team all the time, I say you guys are probably actually doing more for a larger number of patients than like one doctor could do in a month, right? Because the tools you put in are helping thousands of patients, right? Allowing them to kind of get access quicker, allow them to get better care, right? And then for somebody who's interested in going into technology, honestly, I was telling my son this the other day. I said, I think cybersecurity is not going away. So I think that's a really great field. I find it fascinating, honestly. Um, I don't know if I could stomach being a CISO because I think that just takes a lot of guts. But I think the field is really fascinating. But I think for someone wanting to get into IT, honestly, I do feel like it's a great field to be in. There's just so many avenues you can take, whether it's data, whether it's engineering, whether it's coding, right, whether it's like more I'm more visual and artistic and I want to go into the web development, right? There's just so much, so you just need to kind of go out there and figure, okay, what am I interested in, what industry do I want to work in, because I think the need for tech is just going to get more and more so. And so I think it's a great field. And I'm not biased. I'm not biased. Yeah, absolutely.